The Badgers have added to the defensive back room. Have they started to address that position with the commitment of Matt Jung?
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Thank you so much for being here, man. My name is Ryan Harings. I'm your host, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Again, create the account, download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, today we're talking about the Matt Jung commitment. Some more thoughts on Xavier Lucas now that it's marinated a bit. Who are the players that the Badgers have added in the portal that are going to help the most, and what comes next? And we got a new guest on the show. This channel has always been about adding new guests, new voices. I'm really excited to get Connor Whelan on the show, writer over at Bucky's Fifth Quarter. Connor, I was mentioned before the show. Really do appreciate you being on here. I've seen you. We've interacted before online, so this is going to be really good. I want to start here. Matt Jung commits to the Badgers transfer portal. Got the newest addition from the transfer portal. Neenah, Wisconsin, originally spent the last 2 years at Bethel College. Very productive, big guy, 6'3", like 215, 220, and he looks it. What are your thoughts on Matt Jung committing to the Badgers?
Well, one thing I love is that he was teammates for a bit with Grant Dean and Neenah. I love that connection already. And I think it's something that's been lacking in the portal era is guys from Wisconsin. And I'm not from Wisconsin, but it's awesome to see hometown guys who talk about in these articles, hey, I've been rooting for the Badgers my entire lives, actually wear the cardinal and white. So that I thought that alone was pretty cool. But what I really like about Jung is his size. I think, like you said, it's a really big deal because last year, even with guys like Hunter Wohler, there's not much size in that defensive back room. And I think that's something that really need to be addressed in this portal season. And one thing I also want to mention is that while Jung was a D3 guy, he really had some great Power 5 offers. The ones that were listed were like Washington, Iowa State, Iowa, and Minnesota. And a lot of those are familiar because they're in the Big Ten, but just shows that a lot of teams that typically have a pretty good defense were scouting this guy and even had him for a visit. So that's always a great sign.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Iowa had him slotted as a visit, which they shut down. Wisconsin got him and kind of shut that down. But you look at the type of defensive backs that Iowa has gotten. This feels like the type of player, if he'd gone there, would give us nightmares for like 2 years, would have like 100 tackles a season, and incredibly productive at the D3 level. You're talking last year, 109 tackles, 10.5 for loss, 9 picks, 11 pass breakups. Again, you watch some of the film, you can tell like he's just a bigger, better athlete than like everybody at that level. But the production's there, in-state kid. I want to ask you this because I actually really like this point. In-state player in the portal era, you can't live off in-state recruiting in Wisconsin. We all know that because there's not enough DBs, there's not enough receivers, there's not enough running backs, there's not enough quarterbacks. But it feels more important to get the in-state kids that you can because those players are more likely to stay.
Definitely. I think it's a really interesting thing that you bring up just because it hasn't happened for many teams. Like you see even teams like Michigan and Ohio State that usually have a lot of players from their own respective states. They've just gone out and gotten guys from the West Coast or anywhere else just because that's the way you have to compete in the transfer portal era. And it's especially cool just because a lot of the guys that built this program, like the Jake Nelsons, even the more recent guys are from Wisconsin. So it's awesome to see guys come back from maybe they didn't get as much of a look from Wisconsin in their original high school recruiting process, but it's cool to see them come back to the Badgers later down their recruitment.
Where do you see him fitting into the defense? Because this is a secondary that's lost a ton of pieces, either to graduation with guys like Wohler or Fort Green, or to the portal. We're going to talk about Lucas in a second and get your thoughts on Lucas. Where does he fit into this defense, do you think, next year? Is this a depth piece? Is this a big-time rotational piece for the Badgers?
I would have said it's a depth piece maybe a couple weeks ago, but I think the Badgers have lost enough defensive backs, and I think fans know that he's probably become one of the top-tier guys in that room. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think he offers a lot, like you mentioned earlier, size, but also those stats from D3 show that he really has a good eye for the ball. I mean, 9 picks is nothing to balk at. That is a really impressive stat line. Even the pass breakups is good to focus on as well. But I think he definitely can take a role, kind of a hybrid between maybe a Hunter Wohler and closer to a cornerback, because Hunter Wohler wasn't always the biggest ball hawk, but he definitely was great at tackling. I think Jung could maybe be a hybrid between the best of Hunter Wohler's tackling ability and maybe some of the great ball hawk abilities we've seen of other defensive backs and cornerbacks Wisconsin's had in the past.
Yeah, I agree there. I think when I watch him on film, and This is based on like 3 minutes of film. So I need to, fair warning, I will dig in more, I promise. He feels like a in the box type safety that it could feast on intermediate crossing routes, slant routes. He can take the bigger tight ends. He can match up with those guys. He's not a guy you're going to match up against like a 5'10" receiver on like an arrow route. That's not him. But I think bigger receivers, bigger tight ends, zone coverage, tackling, being in the box, being physical. I think those things, he checks those boxes. And in that sense, if you're looking for a Badger comp, maybe like a Caputo type, that type of player is where I'm thinking. I'm curious if you agree, disagree. What do you think there?
I think Caputo is a really good comp, actually. I was thinking mainly just, like you said, the tight end is actually a really big thing. And we saw it this year. Guys like Tyler Warren in the Big Ten from Penn State, they really dominated on offense. And you've seen this kind of resurgence of the tight end position. As you know, like Wisconsin brought in a top portal tight end, Tanner Kozial. So I think Jung, it will be big for him to defend the tight ends because that was a killer, I think, underrated killer in the Oregon game is their tight end Ferguson had some big plays on fourth downs that really killed us because we didn't have much size in the secondary, and it became really difficult to stop him on these like kind of intermediate passing lengths.
Well, I want to get your thoughts on Xavier Lucas. I talked about it a little bit earlier today. Xavier Lucas, for those who, I mean, people don't watch every show. Xavier Lucas left in the portal today, cornerback for the Badgers, came in as a 4-star freshman, tons of physical ability, very likely going to Miami. That's already out there. What were your thoughts when you saw the news? What are your thoughts as somebody who covers the Badgers on Lucas entering the portal?
I think it's obviously a bummer, but I don't think you should also always look at this as the most critical thing. Like it's not the fact that players or the fact that other big programs want to try to poach your players shows that Fickle has done something right with scouting, especially on the defense, because if they're being offered these big sums of money after just a freshman year, it shows that he really has found some under the radar talent. And I know Lucas was obviously offered by Miami and heavily recruited by them in high school, but still, I guess they didn't recruit them enough where he felt that he should go there over Wisconsin. So while it's obviously was a key piece of this defensive back room, and I think he's a major loss for the Badgers, I think it also does show that in the portal era, you will have some losses when you get additions in the transfer portal saga and season because just bigger programs are going to try to throw the bag at kids that you found, and it's just the way it is. And it's a bummer, but it's just we got to live and adapt.
Yeah, and I made the point on the show earlier today. I love what you said there, live and adapt, because I feel like Badger fans are smart fans. Wisconsin fans are smart football fans. I feel like everybody knows this is the new reality, but emotionally, we haven't shifted over to new reality. Like we know it's going to be hard to keep everybody, and yet when we lose somebody, we're like, oh, how could you lose him? But if you look at USC has lost like 5 dudes this offseason. Michigan has, Bama has. Bama just had an open note to their NIL donors asking for more money, pleading for more money as they're losing guys. There was Ryan Williams to the portal rumors at one point. Like this is happening everywhere. And I think it's hard, but you got to just adjust to the new normal, which is college football. And the new normal is Wisconsin's never going to keep every stud, as frustrating as that is.
Definitely. I think you make a great point there that really every program is losing guys. If you look even in the Big Ten, places like Nebraska are losing. I know it's not the same thing, but still seeing other programs in a similar area of the country in the same conference, it's interesting to see a lot of those programs also lose guys. And it just shows that some of your talented guys, you're going to try to pay and keep, and that's just the way it is. And then some guys you're going to have to, I guess, just let other teams outbid you for them. And that's a bummer, but it's the way it is, and you really can't dwell on it too long because there's so many moving parts of transportal season that you have to adapt, like you said, and really find another option at DB if you're trying to place a guy like Lucas.
By the way, I also love that Connor's here to shed some optimism on everybody's frustrated, and Connor's like, yeah, but like they wouldn't have taken him if he wasn't good. That's like the police officer coming to your apartment after it was robbed and be like, well, they wouldn't have taken it if you didn't have a nice TV. I mean, like you're not wrong.
I try because I feel like you have to look at the positives, and the issue is that there's not much right now. Like obviously, transportal class is looking good, but people are frustrated with the 5-7 record, which obviously I am too. But you have to look at building a team now. You either have crazy success in your first year with a transportal class, or it takes a couple of years, and especially with the way that it went down with Jim Leonard as interim head coach and some of the stuff with Chris, it definitely wasn't the best shape that Fickle came in for. So I think the fact that we have some of these freshmen that really balled out early and just already getting offers to go to other programs is really a bummer, but it also shows that he has an eye and a knack for talent. So maybe these next guys that from the 2025 class can step up as well. We just really don't know yet.
No, I love it. We're going to take a quick break there. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about shifting over to the positive side. Who are 4 or 5 Badger portal commitments that we feel are most likely to play a significant role next year? We're going to talk about the next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show and a quick second to say thank you to everybody tuning in. Today's episode brought to you by our great friends over at Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That'll definitely happen to me. That's definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. No lie, this thing has been magic for me. My wife used to get on me, be like, what are these PayPal things going on? And I'd be like, I don't know. And she would get so frustrated. She's like, well, figure it out, Ryan. I'm like, I don't know. Rocket Money has helped solve that for me. And I realized that I had a subscription to a pretzel thing. So that was that. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everyone together in one place. It's whether it's subscriptions, whether it's your spending habits, even the goals you want to hit. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved 500 million in canceled subscriptions. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. Today's episode also brought to you by our incredible friends over at Game Time. We got to do more stuff in life, y'all. I say that a lot. That's not on the ad read. They give us an ad read, and some ad reads I got to read verbatim. Y'all probably pick up on that. Some I don't. This one I don't have to read verbatim. I'm just telling you, we got to do more stuff in life. We got to come together and enjoy more because it's too stressful otherwise. Game Time is your ticket to do more things in life. They are there to help you get cheaper tickets, easier to concerts, theater, sporting events. Bring the fam, bring the friends, bring yourself and get away from the fam and the friends if you don't like those losers. Game Time is a great way to do it. Download the Game Time app today. Snag the tickets without the stress over at Game Time. Use code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Snag the tickets without the stress over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create the app. Redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. All right, let's get back into this with Connor. And again, really do appreciate everybody tuning in. As always, Connor, where can people find your work before we get started?
Yeah, as it says down below, my Twitter is @it's _ Connor _ W. So I post a lot there. You can also find my articles at Bucky's Fifth Quarter by SB Nation, and I also write on my personal Substack page, which is also on my Twitter bio. So you can find that all there.
I love it, man. One of the things I want to do is it's really easy, and you talked about it, there's so many moving parts. It's easy to get hung up on you lost this guy. Well, in the meantime, you added 2 other guys. So I want to talk about the players that we think are most likely to make an impact year one next year. I'm going to start with you. Who's your number? I'm assuming our number 1 is going to be the same, but who's your number 1?
My number 1 is probably the same as you. I'd say Billy Edwards Jr. That's mine, at least. I just feel like the issue with Wisconsin the last 2 years has been the quarterback position has not been stable enough, and I feel like while he might not be the flashiest name out there, he really brings a certain amount of stability and consistency to the quarterback position that I think Wisconsin could really benefit from, and I think he also brings an added level of mobility that even guys like Tanner Mordecai and Tyler Van Dyke didn't have coming into Madison.
Yep. I think that's the easy one. I said when he first committed, it feels like a double to me, like in baseball parlance, like you hit a double. You have a really solid pickup. I think he fits the offense. I think he fits Grimes. I think he brings some edge and some energy to that quarterback room, which this team desperately needs. You need a guy who can help lead that and energize that unit. So yeah, 100%. That's the easy one. My number 2 is Kozial, Tanner Kozial, a tight end, big 6'7" tight end, 94 catches last year, who I think is going to pair incredibly well with Grimes in this offense and what he wants to do with those mesh routes, the drag routes, the wide zone, in the red zone. I think he fits a ton of problems that we've had recently, fixes a ton of problems we've had recently. The tight end depth chart hasn't been great. We've had issues in the red zone. He gives, Billy Edwards, who we just talked about, that giant life jacket, essentially. If he's in trouble, throw it to the 6'7" tight end that has incredible hands. He's number 2 for me. I think the first 2 are kind of slam dunks.
Yeah, I'm the same way. My number 2 is Kozial as well, and I feel like I had to focus on offense first because that was the biggest issue last year. There were a couple games where obviously the Oregon game's a big one where we only scored 13 points, and the defense only allowed Oregon to have 16. So if you had a little bit of a more working offense, you probably would have won that game, and that would have been huge for the Fickle tenure. But what I really like about Kozial is just his ability to, like you said, kind of be a safety outlet if you ever need it. And I think that's something that Badgers have been missing recently, is when sometimes last year receivers would not be open and maybe running backs wouldn't find the space. you just wouldn't have much options or anything available on offense. And I think a guy who's really talented already at tight end, who's coming in with a lot of hype as a guy that most programs were reaching out to, but also a guy that NFL draft experts like Field Yates were saying, hey, this guy's a baller and he can really be a next level guy. I think that's a huge for Wisconsin. Obviously, they love their tight ends. Jake Ferguson's a great recent example, but there's just the list goes on in Wisconsin using their tight ends well.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I think now this list gets a little more spicy and interesting. I think those were kind of the two obvious. Who's your number 3?
So my number 3 is a guy that I actually spoke to a couple days ago over text. A great guy to talk to was Parker Peterson, the defensive tackle from Tulane. And I got the chance to talk with him over text and just ask him questions about how he's feeling about coming to Madison, and kind of what led him here. And the first thing I think is really interesting is what other programs offered him. And the biggest ones were like USC, Auburn, Indiana, Rutgers, among others. And those are no programs to balk at. Those are all some great offers. And I really think that that's something I like to focus on. Like I said with Matt Jung, is that you don't always need to look at the transfer rating they have. I feel like you should see what programs are recruiting them and why. And I feel like a lot of the programs that were recruiting Peterson, among Jung and other guys we've gone after, are programs that we kind of emulate and it kind of fits our system well. But especially when I talked to Parker, he made it clear that Wisconsin was very clear about where they put him and what his role would be here. And he also loved it personally because his childhood idol, he said, was JJ Watt. And that's pretty hard to turn down if you want to be like JJ Watt. I think he wears number 99, so that's pretty cool already. But then I asked about who from the coaching staff reached out first. And he talked about how Coach Whitlow reached out really quick into his transfer portal saga. He said this like 30 seconds after he entered, he got a notification from him, and Coach Whitlow explained he'd already been watching his film for a couple of weeks and said that he'd fit right in. And then last, what I want to explain is that Peterson gave some insight about what the Badgers defense wanted to do on the D line, and especially what they wanted to amend from last year. And he said that he wanted to play violent in the interior and talk about being able to get his hand in the dirt and kind of rush the passer, but also stop running plays. And that was the biggest issue last year for Wisconsin. Like they really struggled to stop dynamic running backs, both in the middle, but also on the edges. And I think getting a guy up the middle like Peterson could really kind of anchor that front line.
That's a great one. And that's a ton of awesome insight and appreciate it. Yeah. You make me want to move him up the list I have. He wasn't my 3. I had Mason Reiger at 3. I feel like this team so desperately misses. You're a little bit younger than me. I don't know if you remember the Alec James, Chikwe Obasi defensive line.
I do not. I'm a new Badger fan.
Yeah, no worries at all.
Yeah,
It was, probably about a decade ago at this point. But
yeah,
Alec James was a 6'3", 6'4", 260-pound defensive end that had 5 sacks. And this team so desperately needs a guy on the edge that can get some pressure without blitzing. A guy on the edge that has a little bit of burst, has a big motor. Now, Reiger's got to prove he can be healthy throughout the course of a year with the knee injuries coming off of. But if healthy, I think he's going to start or at least play a huge role. And I think he's going to be a big impact guy on this defensive line. So Reiger was my number 3. I did have Peterson 4. So Peterson, for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, was 4.
Yep.
And there's not a lot I would add there. I would add, and you kind of hit it, I just think it's a great fit for what this team needed. This team needs that guy with that size and that type of motor who's okay playing dirty, right? He's not going to be upset if he's asked to take on a double team or set an edge. So I love your number 3 there. Who is your number 4?
So I went back and forth. I had Mason Reiger for a bit, but then kind of with some of what happened today and what's happened with the DB room, I actually slotted in Matt Jung in there. I think he really, like we mentioned earlier, he could be kind of an anchor in that secondary. And we really have seen how much Coach Tressel has used his safeties, whether that be blitzing or it be even just in coverage for tight ends or any bigger receiver. And I think in the Big Ten, that's really important as well. And with Xavier Lucas with some size for the cornerback room, and guys like Ricardo Hallman, whether they come back or not, are not as big. So having a guy like Jung out there is really important. But I did want to say one thing about Reiger is I'm with you. I think Wisconsin lacked a true edge presence last year because the best games they played defensively were the games where guys like John Pius actually got pressure on the quarterback. That 3-game winning streak was definitely a place where their edge pressure was the best. And they really haven't had a guy like that since the Leo Chenals or more recent examples. And that's really helped them catapult bad offenses in some of those years with good defenses. And I think that was something that we kind of lacked last year.
Yeah, I agree. So I went DB2. I'm at 5. I'll ping you if you had one more, if you had an honorable mention, someone else that you think needs to be talked about a little bit more. I actually went trainer instead of Jung. But same DB, safety. I think Trainer is maybe just a tick faster. I think he has a little more maybe deep field versatility. But I like both these pickups. You got to get more talent in there. You got to get numbers. If it's Jung playing more in the box, Trainer maybe playing more of a deep safety. They're going to mix in with Brown. They're going to mix in with Zachman. I think they'll all be in the mix, and I think you just needed numbers there. So I'm right there with you. One more guy maybe that you think should be talked about more. That actually, let me say this: who's the most underrated guy in the portal? And I didn't prep you on this one, so this is kind of I'm shotgunning you. Who do you think isn't getting talked about enough that they brought in?
One thing I would have said Peterson earlier, but I think this guy's almost as underrated would be Cory Walker. I really like him from Western Michigan. I did a piece before our game against Western Michigan. He was a guy I actually highlighted a bit. I thought watching him on film, he stood out as a guy that, again, like Peterson, he can get his hand in the dirt and play like that. But he also, like, I think he had 5.5 sacks last year. Like in the MAC, that's nothing to balk at. He's a pretty good interior threat, and he can get to the quarterback pretty fast. And I like his size. I believe he's from Illinois, so like it's pretty close here. So I like having the guys from the Midwest with ties like that. And also, I mean, we saw Western Michigan. I think they were bowl eligible. Like they're not a terrible team this year. Like having a guy like that who kind of anchored that front line coming to Wisconsin, who desperately needs more of a presence there. It's really underrated pickup.
Yeah, I like that one. And he had a couple tackles against the Badgers. I'll play them. Played pretty well against that team. That's a team that we did struggle to run the ball against a little bit. It wasn't just Walker, but he was part of that scheme that helped stop us. Great stuff. We're going to take one more break for our friends of the show. We'll come back. We're going to talk about what's next. How many bodies do they have to add in the secondary? Who else might be on the docket here? How are the Badgers looking and what comes next? That's up next on Locked On Badgers. First, a quick break for our friends of the show, great friends of the show over at Listen, it's that time of the year. I've talked about it. I am so excited to watch some of these games because I'm a lifelong fan. I'm a lifelong college football fan. The college football playoff is back, and with a newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoffs begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. And then the Clemson Tigers are going to look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoffs presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, let's jump back into this. I want to just kind of ask you this. What if the Badgers, what is the biggest remaining need? I mean, it's secondary, but how many bodies do they need to add there? I answered my own question. That's poor podcasting. I literally answered my own question as I said it. How many bodies do they need in the defensive back room? Or do you disagree that that's the biggest need?
I think it's tied for the biggest. I'd say cornerback, but I'd also say wide receiver is getting a little bit light right now. And while Grimes is a big run-heavy offense, obviously, you need more bodies there. And I like the pickup of Ballard from Ohio State. I think he's a really talented receiver, but you've seen them be pretty aggressive for other guys. They had Mark Hamper in for the Idaho wideout for a visit, I think, yesterday or 2 days ago. And he seemed to like it. I know he's taking a USC visit right now, but that'll be interesting to see what happens in that recruitment. But getting another receiver would be huge because I was expecting at least one of CJ Williams or Pauling to stay if Tretch came back. But even I think Tretch coming back is a great thing, but you also losing two of your top three leading receivers is never an easy thing. Mm-hmm. So having Vinny is obviously great for stability, and I think Tretch will take a big jump, but having one of those third guys and kind of be a playmaker, whether it's Hamper or a guy like Omega Blake I've seen us connected to, one of those guys would be huge. But like you said, I think cornerback is also important. I think we probably need to add 2 or 3 more bodies at least. I know that some of the guys we have coming in are very talented, and I think maybe a guy like Jameer Scott or a Jamari Washington could step up like a Xavier Lucas this year, but you still need to add some veteran bodies. And we've already seen them start it with Matt Young.
In the quarterback room, I want to specifically talk about, and I'm curious on this one. Again, this isn't something I pinged you on. I'm really good at shotgunning guests. I don't know if that's great podcasting or not. But with the freshmen coming in, I think 1 or 2 of them are going to have to at least play in some type of role. Well, not starting, but just rotationally, even if it's towards the end of a game or to step in for an injury. Who in that room do you like the most to be able to step in maybe at cornerback? I'll just throw mine out there. I actually think the guy not getting talked about enough might be an early play candidate. That's Kairos Gaines, because I think he has enough size, length. He's actually a corner. He can play physically. He's not great with a deep speed thing, but I think he can play off coverage and be a zone guy who will come up and tackle. Is there a guy in that room you look at and say, I think he could play early? Because Xavier, we've had cornerbacks before that have played as freshmen, true freshmen.
Funny enough, my guy was actually Scanes. I think it's interesting to see how many programs came into his recruitment late in the process. Like you saw, obviously he was committed to Miami, Ohio, but you saw a bunch of ACC schools and I think a couple of Big 12 schools also swoop in, and maybe Michigan State, if I'm not mistaken. And those are some pretty solid schools defensively and also just program wise. So that's interesting to see. And I think Fickle made it clear in one of his press conferences that he really liked Scanes' tape and wanted to get him fast. And they obviously had him for a visit, and it took a little while for him to actually commit, but they seemed very glad to get him. So I think that's actually a big one. I like the tandem of like Jameer Scott and Jamar Washington, those guys. I think both of them have pretty good size and speed. And I think both of them could have a Xavier Lucas-esque jump, but I think Kairos Gaines is the guy that could be pretty close to ready on day one.
Yeah, I agree. I love it. Who's someone in the portal that you're looking at that you mentioned Hamper, the receiver. I like him a lot. Good size, productive. Idaho receiver, as you mentioned, going to USC visit. Who are a couple other names that you're looking at and saying, Badger fans, I would keep an eye out for this guy?
One guy I mentioned too, I actually like even more than Hamper, is Omega Blake. He's out of Charlotte. I can't remember exactly where he transferred into from before Charlotte, but he's a really good receiver. He's pretty sure he's a deep threat, and he's kind of what we wanted CJ Williams to be this year. And I think he fits the scheme well, at least. And we're one of the first offers for him. I think he has a couple of visits coming up, and it's unclear whether or not we'll get a visit or we'll get farther in that recruitment. But we seem to like him at first. So I think that would be a name to keep an eye on. And besides wide receiver, that's about it. I do have one cornerback name I'd like to mention is the Marion University cornerback Dwight Lewis. I saw that we're having him for an official visit, I believe tomorrow, and I watched some of his tape. He's very impressive. I know Marion University is not a school that might stand out to kids, but I feel like cornerback's one where if you watch the tape and it looks good, you can't really argue with much, and that's why guys like Kairos Gaines jump off the page, even as a 3-star that was originally headed to Miami of Ohio.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you have the physical tools as corner, it's going to play at any level. Like now, as your Forkner, it took a year because he was kind of dinged up at get bigger, but he was really solid this year. And people would look at the level he played in and write him off. I think if you find the physical skill set, they can play. Connor Whelan, this has been an awesome show, man. I really do appreciate it. Once again, go check out Connor's work. The Twitter account's down there. Go check him out on Bucky's Hits Corridor. Our good friend Scary Alvarez is over there as well. Rohan also does incredible work. I met him at a basketball practice he was covering. Really good guy. So go check out their website. Go follow Connor. Man, really do appreciate it. And would love to do this again, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
When you're done here, go check out Locked On College Football and Locked On Big Ten over on our internal networks. You can get all the news on the conference and the sport that we all love over on those two channels on Wisconsin, and we will talk later.